Thank you. Thank you. Let's be seated, please. Program Director, Minister Naledi Pandor, Acting Premier of Gauteng, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi, ministers who are here, Minister Masuta, Minister Dlamini, Minister Tulas Ngesi, and deputy ministers who are also here, MECs of our provincial government here in Gauteng, and members of the provincial legislature, members of the judiciary and the magistracy, members of the legal fraternity, representatives of civil society and leaders thereof, leaders of faith-based and religious organizations, members of the Oak Dean and Boysons communities, and members of the media, and ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my singular honor and privilege to be here this morning during Human Rights Month to fulfill the promise that our government made to the people of South Africa. We solemnly promise that we will take firm, decisive steps and act very, very swiftly to eradicate gender-based violence and femicide in our society. We have embarked on a journey of doing precisely that in terms of seeking to keep that promise. Right here today, we are turning the tide of doing precisely that. The character of a country can be judged by how that society's most vulnerable people are treated. We have heard the pleas of survivors of gender-based violence that they would like to be treated with respect by our criminal justice system. In opening this new sexual offenses court, we are affirming the right of the women and the girls of our country to be treated by the criminal justice system with dignity, with understanding, with compassion, with professionalism and empathy. The opening of the court today, together with the signing of the Declaration Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, are two of the measures we have put in place since the presidential summit convened in November of last year. The summit, which was attended by well over 1,200 women from all walks of life, opened the eyes, it also opened the ears, and it even opened the hearts of many of our people to the gravity and the impact of gender-based violence in our country. Since the summit, we have seen the rise of mass-based social movements that has embraced both women and men from across racial, cultural, religious, political, and socio-economic divides. They have been united by one common cause: to see an end to gender-based violence. We've gathered here today as representatives from across society, from women's organizations, from faith-based and community organizations, and from the legal and law enforcement fraternity. As a nation, today we are making a bold and unequivocal declaration that we refuse, as the people of South Africa, to yield to and to accept gender-based violence. This is a practice that must be obliterated from the face of South Africa once and for all. We will not allow it to steadily consume our people, to erode our dreams of a stable and peaceful society in which all have equal rights and opportunities, regardless of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, or even the circumstances of their birth. Today is a special day in that we will be signing the Declaration against gender-based violence and femicide, and by doing so, we are essentially saying, as a collective, that the scourge of women abuse has no place whatsoever in South Africa. And it should have no place also in our homes, in our places of work, in our churches, in our schools, and on the streets of our townships, on the pathways of our villages, and also in our cities and our towns. Human Rights Month gives us cause to reflect on how far we have come as a nation in entrenching a human rights culture across all sectors of society. Our Constitution, as we all know, as well as our Bill of Rights, is one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. It also holds the right to equality, to freedom, to dignity and security of the person amongst its key outstanding aspirations. Yet, for so many of this country's women, these aspirations have not been met. So many of our country's women face a lived reality of harassment, of abuse, and of violence. In essence, our country is facing a national crisis when it comes to this. There is no day that goes past without us hearing harrowing stories of how women have been abused, have been raped, have been killed, and how children have also fallen victim to all those terrible deeds. Our women don't feel safe. They don't feel safe in their homes and on the streets of our country. Rape, abuse, and sexual assault is rampant, often committed by those closest to them. Gender-based violence affects all of us, and it also impacts on all of us, and it impacts on our lives. It extracts a heavy toll on relationships, on families, on communities, on workplaces, on schools, and on our universities. And it breeds fear, suspicion, and other horrible deeds as well in society that still where society still needs to come to terms with all these terrible things that are done against our women and children. I said at last year's presidential summit that there is no acceptable level of gender-based violence. We don't want to bring the figures down. We want to eradicate this evil from our society. We have enacted progressive legislation like the Domestic Violence Act, the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act, the Child Justice Act, and the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act, to name but just a few. We need serious introspection as a nation. However, as to why our laws are still failing to adequately protect vulnerable women is something that we need to introspect on. We have to ask why, despite the resources that we have dedicated to combating this problem in the criminal justice system, do survivors feel that our law enforcement system and our courts are victimizing them all over again? Above all, to ask whether our various policies to combat, we are truly adhering to the ethos and the true meaning of our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Across a number of other areas of our people's lives, such as access to courts, is something that many people feel they do not have. And yet access to courts is a fundamental human right. It facilitates the protection of our rights as people, such as the right to equality, to privacy, and to dignity. It is therefore fitting that the signing of the declaration is taking place here, where we are launching the 84th dedicated sexual offences court that we have established as a government since 2013. The existence of the court is an indication of higher reporting rates and the confidence from the community that such support services work. Earlier, Advocate Batoi was saying, as head of the NDPP, as the NDPP was saying, we need more and more courts like this one that we see here. And they should not only be in the towns and the cities of our country, but they should also be in the rural areas. And she is absolutely right. Now, the existence of the court is an indication of higher reporting rates and confidence from the community that such support services actually do work. At the same time, the fact that we have over 80 such courts, 84 to be precise, is also an indication of the grave extent of sexual offenses in our country, and it is a sad indictment of our society. Advocate Batoi told me that up to 30% of the cases that they have to deal with as the NPA are offenses that have to deal with abuse of women and children. This is very sad. Here we have established an integrated and comprehensive facility that will provide services to survivors of gender-based violence in several courts: a sexual offenses court, domestic violence court, a maintenance court, a children's court, 4 district courts, a civil court, and a regional court. In launching this facility, in other words, this court, we aim to put an end to the secondary victimization of survivors of gender-based violence. According to some research, only 1 in 9 cases of rape are reported in South Africa. This is no small part due to what UNICEF describes as a general lack of confidence in the criminal justice system, but also in the way in which survivors of sexual offenses are treated if and when their cases finally do make it to trial. This court or this facility is geared towards providing a safe and comforting space that protects the rights of the survivors of gender-based violence and also protects their dignity. I was most impressed as I was being shown around the various rooms in this court building, to see how even young children will be able to find this facility to be conducive to them being able to give either evidence or testimony in a relaxed and a very conducive atmosphere. This will enable the effective handling of gender-based violence cases to ensure that the victims do finally see justice. Just as we strengthen our ability to arrest and successfully prosecute offenders, we must also intensify the broad range of measures that are required to prevent such violence in the first place. We must make greater use of research and evidence to devise holistic solutions and interventions. We must introduce life skills training for our young people that focuses on building respect in relationships, gender equity, and strengthening communication and other relationship skills. Research has shown that this results in a reduction of intimate partner violence in adolescents. We must strengthen the government funding efforts to focus on criminal enforcement, advocacy for survivors, and building local capacity, because research has shown also that this leads to a decrease in rape statistics. We must support women and girls who seek to obtain temporary restraining orders against their abusers. And we must also increase awareness around dating violence. We must better coordinate our activities as government, between government departments and with civil society as well. We also must focus on improving various criminal justice and social interventions, combined with tracking mechanisms to measure the effectiveness of our responses. The declaration that we are signing here today represents our collective commitment to implement what I would call a comprehensive and effective prevention and response program to end gender-based violence and femicide in our country. Now, through this declaration, we are also affirming that political, government, business, and community leadership should take joint and collective responsibility in ending gender-based violence and femicide. It is this cohort of leadership that should be held accountable for actions and omissions that serve as obstacles to achieving the goal of ending the scourge of gender-based violence. We have agreed to establish an interim steering committee with resources. Yes, with resources to establish a permanent multi-sectoral coordinating body and implement actions in this declaration. The interim steering committee, which has already been established, will develop an action plan and the structure of the multi-sectoral steering committee. It will also map the response of services provided for survivors. It will also establish a national rapid response to support survivors and develop guidelines for ethical media reporting as well. The multi-sectoral coordinating body will be championed by the President and governed by a statutory framework. It is significant and necessary that most members of this body will be the members of civil society, Government, on its part, working together with its partners, will review the existing laws as well as policies related to gender-based violence and femicide to determine if they are adequate. And this is where working together is going to have to come to the fore, so that collectively, with organs of civil society, with government, we should be able to look very closely at our existing laws and see whether they still have efficacy and effectiveness in dealing with this scourge. In particular, we will finalize outstanding legislation such as the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill and the Victim Support Services Bill. We will work with all stakeholders to develop policy around the decriminalization of sex work. There is a need for government to investigate harmful religious and cultural practices that lead to the exploitation of women and children. As we establish these structures, we commit ourselves in this declaration to maintain, to resource, to strengthen, and to reinvigorate the existing gender machinery. It is our desire with this declaration to strengthen our country's capacity to produce research and database to inform evidence-based policies, solutions, and programming. And this should bear testimony to the fact that we do not see this declaration as just a piece of paper whose very, very far-reaching interventions are not going to be implemented. We intend to implement what we set out in this declaration. Survivors of gender-based violence need to be treated with fairness, with respect, with dignity, and privacy. We will therefore work to enable communicators and institutions responsible for communication to develop, to adopt, and to execute ethical guidelines of reporting. To prevent gender-based violence requires that we implement social behavior change programs in our communities to tackle patriarchal values and norms. We must target people who can influence attitudes, behaviors, and practices that promote gender-based violence. Through this declaration, we aim to ensure that our economic development model also takes into consideration non-gender conforming people and other marginalized groups, such as people with disabilities. Having regard to the adoption of the summit declaration by the delegates of the Presidential Gender-Based Summit, and having agreed that this declaration is in the end the embodiment of priority actions setting a roadmap to a South Africa free from gender-based violence and femicide, and as envisaged in the National Development Plan, and also having acknowledged that this declaration is an affirmation of intent. Now, we are all sitting here because we want to witness and we want in the end to embrace this declaration that we are going to sign today. Now, in my capacity as the President of the Republic of South Africa, I therefore proclaim that this Presidential Summit declaration against gender-based violence and femicide is hereby assented to and signed on behalf of the government of the Republic of South Africa. And today begins a new era in our determined struggle to rid our society of gender-based violence and femicide. The commitments made in this declaration are, in the end, compatriots, far-reaching and will require a great deal of effort. They will also require resources, budgetary resources for that matter, and that is what all of us as a nation need to be aware of. We will require significant resources if we are going to end gender-based violence in our country. But it is also going to require a great deal of cooperation, where we will have to commit ourselves that we are going to work together, where we will go hand in hand, working together and walking together to bring an end to gender-based violence. And I implore all of us to see this as a joint effort, where all of us have our roles to play. And at times when government falters, slows down, we should be on hand to raise the issues with government and get government to step up. And indeed, where various community-based organizations also falter, we will be the first to raise the issue and say, we have a huge task ahead of us, and it requires our total commitment. We are determined that we should implement all the resolutions without delay and without fail. Working together, I'm certain that we will succeed. I am now at a point, as I stand here, where I am ready, with my pen in hand, to sign this declaration. The question I would ask is that, are we also ready to sign this declaration, but not only to sign, but to adhere to what is set out in this declaration and to see the declaration implemented? That is the question that I pose, because as for me, I am now going to sit on that table and sign the declaration to show our determination. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The president asked whether we are ready. We are ready. We are ready for Ramaphosa. So please, Mr. President, you'll be led. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Thank you. We thank the president for his profound address. The president will now join the representatives of civil society that I will call out to sign the declaration the president has referred to. The president used the word he's going to assent. This is a very important legal commitment to the standing of the declaration that will be signed. Could I then invite the various representatives as follows? Hashtag the total shutdown, Ms. Sibongile Mtembu. And then could I invite, on behalf of Call for Action, Ms. Nonhlanhla Sibanda. Could I invite, on behalf of Gender Links, Ms. Lindiwe Koza? Could I invite, on behalf of the KwaZulu-Natal? All right. Oh, I'm advised that we'll do 3 at a time. So I'll call the rest as we continue. Okay. The next group of representatives who will sign are the KZN Network on Violence Against Women, represented by Nizam Edwards, the National Shelter Movement of South Africa, represented by Zubeida Dango, and the Shukumisa Campaign, represented by Shahida Omar. So if those three could come forward, please. Hmm? Asoze apelama, asoze apelama. Could we then have, thank you. Could we have the next group? The organizations are Stop Gender-Based Violence Campaign, represented by Rahadi Mutlathani. The Women Inkwelo Network, represented by Leslie Ann Foster. And the Women on Farms organization, the Women on Farms Project, represented by Rebecca Mort. So if those three could come forward. So our congratulations and thanks to all the signatories. Could we give them a round of applause? And we thank the president as well. This is a historic and profound moment in the women's struggle against gender-based violence. It's the first time a president has made such a commitment in South Africa. Oh, it's still photo opportunity time.